Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Troy McKenzie. I have the privilege of being the Dean of NYU School of Law, and I am delighted to see all of you here for today's event as we celebrate Professor Jerry Cohen and the release of his memoir, Eastward, Westward, Life in Law. Jerry has had an extraordinary career. I don't think there's any other way of describing it. And it's an honor for us to reflect on his influence here at NYU and more globally on the legal profession and on the world. Jerry came to NYU as someone who was already fully formed and distinguished. I came to NYU and I was neither fully formed nor distinguished, but became that later on. So, and I think, as we all know, he was a pioneer in the field of the study of China and the law, really from the very beginning. He taught with distinction at Harvard Law School and taught a course that was one of the most popular at that law school. In fact, about a year ago, Judge Jed Rakoff of the Southern District of New York was here at NYU. We were honoring the judge, and as I was preparing remarks to introduce the judge, he sent me a reflection that he had published in the Harvard Law Alumni Magazine, and the question was, what was the most influential class that you took at Harvard Law School? And Judge Rakoff said it was Jerry Cohen's class, that it completely changed his view of the law and framed the way that he later approached his time on the bench, questioning what seemed to be basic premises of the entire legal system, that stepping outside of what was familiar and looking at something that in some ways was unfamiliar but in other ways was familiar, a separate legal system, a separate society, had forced him to think much more deeply and profoundly about questions of justice and the law. Jerry really did raise our profile here at NYU in the study of the law in China and elsewhere in Asia. Many, many students were attracted here to pursue their JD and LLM degrees with him. And beyond his academic work, Jerry really has had a gift for building community. As a very junior professor, I remember when I would bump into Jerry in the hallway and he would invite me to some convening or some gathering, a group of Chinese judges visiting the United States, and he would invite me and other colleagues to come and interact. And he established the U.S. Asia Law Institute and put it on the map as something that we are tremendously proud of. As Jerry approached retirement, we were thrilled to announce that the Jerome Cohen Professor of Law had been endowed, and this was our way of reflecting on his importance to the law school. Thanks to the generosity of an extended family of alumni, of scholars and friends from around the world, the chair stands as a testament to Jerry's pioneering contributions to legal education and scholarship and his importance to NYU. And we are honored and delighted to have the inaugural shareholder, Dean Hualing Fu, who is here as the Jerome Cohen Visiting Professor of Law. Congratulations. So I have not read the memoir yet. I look forward to reading it. I look forward to critiquing it and sending you my critiques, Jerry, so expect those. And I think we will hear next from Dean Fu, but I would like to invite Catherine Wilhelm to introduce Dean Fu.
Thank you very much, Dean McKenzie. So I'm Catherine Wilhelm, current Executive Director of the U.S. Asia Law Institute. And I'm just so pleased to see you all here. It's been, you can imagine, an adventure to pull this together, and we have in this room so many of Jerry's students, former students, his mentees, his former colleagues in his law firm life, all these familiar faces whom we haven't had together in this room for a while, since Jerry's retirement. So this is a special occasion on a lot of levels. So I just wanted to say a few brief words about what we're going to do for the next 90 minutes or so. So Jerry is going to make some remarks about his memoirs and the process of writing them and why he still has more to say. And then Dean Fu, the visiting professor, Jerome Cohen, visiting professor, is going to engage in a conversation with Jerry about the book and about U.S.-China relations, China studies, China legal studies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then at about 5 o'clock, we're going to pause so everybody gets some food and drink. And then after about 10 minutes, we'll sit back again and you will have a chance to ask questions, make comments. And then we'll end the program with some brief remarks from Professor Frank Upham, who is the co-founder and co-director of the U.S. Asia Law Institute. And then Professor Jose Alvarez will take us out. He's our current faculty director. So that's the plans for the rest of the program. So now I'll introduce Dean Fu, who really doesn't need any introduction because I think at least half of the very knows him very well from his eloquent writings. We're currently co-teaching a class on law and society in China, which is one of the courses that Jerry created when he set up the Asia Law program here. And it's just such a delight to have someone with Dean Fu's knowledge and nuanced perceptions and reflections on comparative law, U.S.-China law, and how they compare in the same seminar with me. I'm learning so much already. So he has been dean in Hong Kong University for about 5-6 years, but has been teaching in Hong Kong for 3 decades, and is originally trained at one of China's finest law schools. Degrees from University of Toronto, and too many publications to list. So if you'd like to exchange chairs with Dean Fu, then you will come up and take a chair here, and then Jerry, so I invite you to say whatever you would like to say by way of opening remarks, and then Dean Fu will take over, and I'm going to hand him the mic.
Well, if you can hear me, please let me know there's no problem.
No problem.
No problem.
All right, good. For me, the big treat today is welcoming Huang Fu. He seems like a very modest guy, but he's very slippery. He's hard to pin down. We worked a couple of years before he managed to tell us he could come for this semester. And it will be a good one. I know many other schools are already envious that we've been able to pull it off, but I hope this is not the end but the beginning. I am thrilled to see all my friends here. There isn't a row that doesn't have a handful of people I can recall meeting for the first time or working with early in my career. I mean, I even have photographic evidence when it comes to Steve Orland's. This is a book in Chinese. I don't expect most of you to read it. But since this happens to be, thanks to Columbia Press, a book party without a book, I thought we had this book that has been pulled together by Daniel Yu Ping. It has so many, you shouldn't believe everything, but it does have this wonderful photograph of me and Steve and this unidentified fellow between us, waiting for the train to go to Tianjin in November 79. This unidentified fellow probably shouldn't have been with us, except we're modern people who believe in reform, that prisoners, ex-felons, or current felons can be reformed. And this is H.R. Haldeman, the notorious Nixon manager. And I don't know how we got mixed up with it. But in those days, in the Peking Hotel, if you wanted to find somebody, you had to rely on the bulletin board, and people would leave notes. And one day I saw a couple of notes from some guy who pretended to be H.R. Haldeman, and I paid no attention. Well, the next afternoon or morning, I get an irate phone call. This is Haldeman. Why don't you answer my message? And I said, I didn't think you were real. The last I heard of you, you were serving a 5-year term. He said, I've got to see you. I said, I'm booked solid. That was a very busy time for us. China was just opening up. It was exciting. I said, look, here was one of my major mistakes. I said, the only time I have open tomorrow is lunchtime. I'll meet you for a quick lunch in the East dining room of the Peking Hotel. Well, that was wrong. I didn't realize what it would do for my popularity. Normally, I just eat there and people pay no attention. But when you sit down with H.R. Haldeman, you discover many new friends. They come up and they say, how are you? And who's this? Etc. And I really was so annoyed, especially one of them, Fox Butterfield, who wrote a very good book about early PRC modernization alive in the bitter sea. Fox, working for the New York Times, who wrote a weekly column, Seen Together, came up to me and said, what were you and Haldeman talking about? I said, I can't tell you, client's privilege. He said, how would you like to see an article in tomorrow's Times that says, seen having lunch together with Professor Cohen of Harvard and H.R. Haldeman of Nixon in prison. I said, Fox, you can't do that to me. That's unfair. And I knew since we were tennis playing friends, I knew he wouldn't do it. But it was a difficult experience. Now this other fellow standing behind me, Steve Orleans, who was over there, who did testify to our whole trip to Tianjin. They were too early. We told them that. They thought they could get an early hotel and be ahead of the league in seeking investments in China. And I told them he'd be crazy to invest at that early time. There was nothing, no experience, no legislation, nothing. And in Tianjin, not in Beijing. So, well, fortunately, he didn't listen to me. And we all went to Tianjin. And it's the only time I've ever slept in Joe and I's bed. Because they put us up at the Communist Party headquarters. And Joe and I, unfortunately, wasn't there. And it turned out to be the old recreation club for foreigners in Tianjin. And we had a great time. I heard Steve sing Peking opera. He had 17 mouth ties based on long experience in China, mostly in Taiwan. And I was very impressed. So that was a memorable visit. As expected, it led to nothing for the Nixon people. When Haldeman got out of jail, a California friend of Nixon who ran a real estate company tried to be helpful. And he said, let's send him to China. You're still in good repute in China. And sure enough, Haldeman got everybody but me to answer his message. So every face here is a story as I look at you. And I don't know whether I should be worried or not. You see Judge Sidney Stein here, who normally sentences prominent felons to long terms imprisonment. And is a yes, and he's even wearing a bow tie. That's it. We always have in common our interest in bow ties. And Sidney was always very tolerant of my choices. So thank you for coming, Sidney.
Thank you, and I wore this for you.
My family keeps pouring in. So there's my granddaughter, Delphine, and her husband, Eric. We should say our sons here are Peter, Seth, and Ethan. And just the other day on Friday, I was about to have what they call a procedure in the hospital that looks inside your heart to see have you developed any problems with your heart. And literally, as I was sitting there, I thought, well, I better check in with Seth. He's my family medical advisor. And I said, what are you up to? And he told me that just within the hour, Joan and I we had our sixth great-grandchild.
Wow.
Sixth great-grandchild. Very good-looking boy. It had a funny effect on me. I thought there's a certain symmetry to life. I'm about to go out the window, and here comes this beautiful boy. There was a little movie, to say the least. Well, what can I say about the book? When I was a kid, whenever I was ill, my father's father, who was a retired garbage man, a trash buyer, he'd go around with a horse and wagon and buy up what people didn't need in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And he'd come and see me. I could have talked to him for hours about the old country. Why did he come over at age 12 from an area in the rural part of Poland near Krakow? I never asked him a word. He didn't tell me a thing. And it later made me feel very bad that I didn't know any family history. and in recent decades have had to rely on our son Seth and others in the family who are really family historians. And I thought, why shouldn't my children know something about my own youth and what I was thinking and what their mother was thinking? And that's how this thing got started. I didn't know it would take so long. My advice to all of you is don't wait until you're in your 90s to begin this. It's easier done in your 70s or 80s. But that's how it started. And I was surprised how much I could remember without book. This isn't a research book. This is a book off the top of my head. And occasionally I had to check out one or two points that were undoubtedly a few errors somewhere I couldn't spot. But it was fun writing, and I enjoyed it. And at Columbia University Press found readers who seemed to enjoy it. So 5 years later, here we are. And I hope some of you will not wait and see the movie. Read the book. And these movies these days, especially once our relations with China have become so bad, it's easier to make good movies about China. You don't feel you're going to be crushed for telling the truth. And that's what's happening. My college classmate, whom I discussed in When You Get the Book on the 19th of next month, was Jack Downey. And many of you have heard me tell the story. In our senior year, 1950, 51, the Korean War was going badly. None of us who were about to graduate from college knew what to do. I used to look at the bulletin board that said Ford Foundation's coming up, or General Motors, whatever, Ford Motor Company. But one day there was a sign that said, Mr. John Jones of the CIA will be here to interview graduating seniors. I thought, CIA, I'm majoring in international relations. Instead of getting killed in Korea, maybe it's a good idea to go to Washington and be an analyst. So I was among 30 people. And we were only 30 out of maybe several hundred who were interested in this CIA thing. But in my room, there were about 30. And the fellow wouldn't tell us anything. Why were we there? Why was he there? I said, can't you at least give us a hypothetical? He said, Mark, I'll give you a hypothetical, but it's purely hypothetical. He said, we might want to drop you into Red China to organize resistance against the new communist government. My jaw must have hit the table. And I said, gosh, this is in front of the group. I said, that sounds awfully dangerous. And he was quite irate. He said, no, during the last war, we, meaning the OSS, we had fewer casualties than the infantry. And I said, you mean on a relative or absolute? He said, you don't sound very interesting. I said, you're right. And I got up and I actually left the room. I later found out that of the other 30 there, 12 volunteered, but 6 were rejected as insufficiently rugged. But my classmate Jack Downey, a delightful person who God chose as a prep school fellow, he was not insufficiently rugged. He was captain of the wrestling team, 185-pound tackle on the Harvard varsity football team. They swept him up, and 16 months later, 16 months from graduation, which he didn't bother to attend, he was shot down over China, trying to pick up spies that were working for the rival Kuomintang regime. Well, that got me started. My classmates decided in the reunion we had in 1966, 15 years after graduation, that we should take it in our hands and try to get them out. And since I was a specialist by then on China, I should be the one responsible. Well, it took 7 years, but we did it. And it was a fascinating exercise. You can read about it in several books now. Excuse me. I think the best is called Agents of Subversion by John Delury, who is teaching up in Canada. No, he's teaching in South Korea, but is the Yale PhD in history. That got me started. I didn't realize it much. But when I finished the book here, I discovered a few things. One was I seem to have spent a lot of time getting people out of jail who were political critics of authoritarian regimes. And I started to count them. Aquino in the Philippines, I liked him a lot. And I did get him out. I used to use Harvard's Center for International Affairs as a reform school for these people and persuade the leadership of the country that was oppressing them into the value of letting the person out of jail and go to Harvard. And I got this idea from Aquino's sister, who heard I had done this in Korea for Kim Dae-jung, and said, why didn't I do it for her brother? So I started to count them, and I got about 5 or 6 people, and their photographs are in the book. Colombia was very tough on the number of photographs they allowed. But I noticed that when I pruned the number of photographs down to an acceptable lot, that there are these political criminals I had helped out. And I found that a source of satisfaction, and I saw the link that I hadn't previously appreciated. Sometimes you learn a lot about yourself. People have always asked me, are you interested in religion? And I would say no. I'm not an observant person. Our son Seth here is not only observant, but a scholar, even though he's a medical doctor, of Jewish theology and the Bible, Torah, all that. And I always said I'm not into religion. But the other day I saw in a magazine a story, and it used the phrase, tikkun olam. But what is it, Seth?
Fix the world.
Pardon?
Fix the world.
Fix the world, yes. The Hebrew should be translated as repair the damage. Leave the world a better place than you found it. And I started thinking, I must be religious. Because that's been my motivating force right out of Deuteronomy. Even though after I was bar mitzvah, I never did anything religious. I didn't think. So that's another thing you discover about yourself. What motivates us? Why are we there? My father was a small town lawyer, and in addition to an office in Elizabeth, New Jersey, in the suburb of Linden, he had a home office where people would come on weekends or nights. And supposedly, my parents said, one night at dinner, there was a doorbell ringing. They asked me to see who it was. I came back and I said, Daddy, there's a client in the office and he's guilty. So it was that kind of an atmosphere I wanted to capture about the early days. But look, I could go right down the line here and tell a good story about each person I know. But I'd like to hear some comments from our distinguished visiting professor, Professor Fulwani.
Thank you, Jared. Sure. So it's really my honor and privilege and humbled to be the inaugural Jerome Cohen visiting professor at the NYU. Thank the McKinsey, the law school for the invitation, and I'm very pleased to meet the family. And Jerry has been talking about the large families, which is the envy of all the Chinese. They would have generations living together. I think when I was reading, I had the privilege of reading the e-version of the book. I'm at where the bow tie story is, so we'll continue. I so get to understand many of you through reading your book. So if I have the chance, there are fascinating stories about most of you in your book. There's one story I want to tell. I was struggling whether I should tell a story. 20 years ago, I sent my tenure application to my university. So in our tradition, basically we send my file to professors in North America. So I think half the reviewers are in this room now. So one letter, I don't tell you which letter I said. I gave him the tenure. He's a nice guy. He may be the future Jerry Cohen in Hong Kong. So I thought it's a nice story to share. So I have many questions, but then I would rather leave the questions to audience after I have some drinks. But let me just start with a very small question. Are you thinking about publishing the book in Chinese, or Chinese translation of the book?
Reaching the Chinese world.
Yeah.
I've asked the publisher, what about translations? And she said, that's being negotiated now. That was a week ago. There was a conference in London, I think. And I don't know, obviously they should be translated into Chinese. I assume it has to be done in Taiwan.
Yeah,
Whether we could-
given what I read, probably it's difficult to have a trend published in Hong Kong.
Yes, well, whether we could even sell it in Hong Kong is a question now. I don't know that I could go back to Hong Kong right now. And I hope you don't have any trouble because you've been visiting us. But certainly it's happened to other people. And I'd like to get it into other languages, but I don't care that much. But I would like to get it into Chinese. I don't know how many people will read a book like this that summarizes a lot of relevant experience and people's reflections. And it's hard to say how many readers there'll be in China. But I don't think Xi Jinping will take the time.
So you have been watching China for 60 years, critically engaging China. Do you have any preferred time? I mean, do you have sort of a few years, a particular decade, you would feel the most exciting in engaging China and meaningful, impactful?
You know, we like to think we're relevant people. And as I said, we're trying to reconstruct a broken past. It had to be exciting for us. Period 1978, 79, 80. The 80s were generally a pretty good time because the Chinese wanted what we knew. We weren't foisting it upon them. There is a professor of history at Hong Kong University who used to be around here, and he wrote a very good book on the roots of American imperialism and its impact in China. And then he indicts me as the classic example of this effort to make the Chinese like us. And I was a little annoyed with that. He's been in my office and he never even told me he was writing the book. He could have interviewed me at length. But in any event, I wrote a fairly tough rebuttal. That was an exciting time. The late 70s, the early 80s, you had to feel the world may be coming together. This is what we bet on. Steve Orleans was interested in China. He must have been from the time he was born. Certainly all through his college career and law school. And there are many in this room who are just like that. I remember Nico meeting in Shanghai. There are people saw China coming into the world, and if it could be managed appropriately, it would be good for everybody. So that was a very exciting time. And of course, you have to deal with disillusionment. I was better prepared than most because I was older. I felt sorry for Jamie, who gave her all for us in Beijing for many years. And they hadn't gone through the Cultural Revolution. I was old enough to have gone through it, and I predicted during it in writing a book on criminal justice in China that the Chinese people were too good to stand for this, and there would be a swing back in the momentum of China's progress, and that we should keep hope. And that was vindicated in the late 70s and 80s. But the struggle was not simple. And when you ask yourself, what would have happened if things had gone just the other way? It could have been, and still might be in the future, a better China for the Chinese people, and better for international relations. But it's hard to say. Life is not easily predictable. But while you're involved in it, it feels good to be on, as I used to say, the right side of history. And I think that's what motivated many of the people I worked with in this room. And I hope we are not without hope. So I'm confident, although I won't live to see the end of Xi Jinping, many in this room will, and that will be a critical time. But you're in a better position. You fought with these guys recently. You've had to steer a course for the continuation of legal education that is hostile to what many of the Communist Party leaders believe today, even when they talk about the rule of law, especially rule by law. So I'd be interested in hearing whether you share any of my optimism. I think of you still as a younger person.
That's what you said. You said I'm still a baby. Right. So you are in the book. You are very not very optimistic. Right. You explain that is so because you look at China at a longer time span. You start engage China in the 60s and the 70s. Of course, then you witness the reform, the change. Most of us only look at the tail end, right? Look at China after the 80s. So there was the reference point is very different. In many ways, I'm also optimistic about Hong Kong because of my mainland background. So I'm familiar with what has happened in Hong Kong in the recent years. So, but most people in the China study community are not young. In this new geopolitical atmosphere, do you have any advice to sort of re-engage China in a constructive, critical way?
Patience is essential. Longevity, even more so. I said China develops and then really like a pendulum back and forth. It used to be every 3 or 4 years. Now the period's getting longer. But I do think during this period of difficult waiting, we can't be passive. We have to reach out. We have to do as much as possible to maintain or develop exchanges, ideas, even if they seem to be lost on the people we're talking to. And there's always the underground viewpoint where maybe what you say can't be printed, but it gets around through various ways. There are various people here like Joe Nunn, who's here from Harvard, who had experience in this. So I can't urge you more than to join the National Committee on U.S. China Relations. Continue the work that Steve and others are doing there, Steve Orland. we have to keep it up. We have to try to do more. And that's all we can do. But I think in the end, it pays off. And sometimes in unexpected ways. So I'm not as discouraged as those who followed me 10 years later, 15 years later, because I've seen earlier changes in China. And by the way, it's true in Taiwan. We see the big changes in Taiwan. I hope the pendulum will keep swinging toward political freedom. Does that indicate we should move on?
So thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much for being so sharp, so engaging, and above all, so hopeful. Thank you very much.
So we have some food in the back, and drinks. People are welcome to take that, and try to return to your seats in about 10 minutes. I know that's challenging because we want to have some time for Q&A. And also, if you're interested in taking a copy of this book, this is not Jerry's book, but this is a book edited, compiled in honor of Jerry. We have copies over there, and there are plenty. We have more.
It'll keep you off the streets.
If you want to get in some questions, this is your chance. We may or may not be able to get Jerry to do another program with us. He will be at the Asian Society on February 19th. Yeah, the evening of, I believe it's 6 o'clock. But you can check on their website for details if you want to hear more. And also, I believe they expect that they will have a copy of the book on the evening of February 19th.
Great.
So that will be great. But I see everybody has already found, of course, the little excerpt that we were able to publish. It's just a couple of chapters. It gives you a bit of a taster of the tone of it and what's in it. And so I'm hoping based on that and also your long knowledge of Jerry and so on, there'll be a lot of questions from this audience. So who would like to be first? Don't be shy.
Who would like to be second?
Hi, Jerry. I'd like to ask, after thinking back over your life and writing that book, what was the most surprising insight you got from writing that book?
How much fun it was. Can you hear me?
No.
You know, I like to write. I don't like to be interrupted. So here I can stay home and just go on writing. But I didn't realize that other people are deterred if it's too long. I submitted this manuscript to Columbia Press, and they told me there's such a thing as a length limit. They think they maybe cut 50,000 words. I felt like a Japanese writer committing seppuku. It was very difficult. But I had a good editor, Richard Bernstein, whom I knew when he was getting his PhD at Harvard. And he made some good suggestions. So we have an appendix. The thing I live most in fear of is forgetting to mention relevant students. And I don't know, I'm sure I must have forgotten some. But I've always liked to name drop. And this was the time to do it. And I'm not sure I got everybody. I still am not.
What about the irrelevant students?
Pardon?
What about the irrelevant students?
Yes, that's
Jerry,
good.
Jerry, can you tell us about the appendix? Can you tell us about the appendix of the book? Basically, you're saying that there's 50,000 words that were edited out. How do other people, can we also read that? How do we have access to that?
That's what an appendix is, it's in the book. So it's silly kind of compromise. But they were afraid that too many non-Harvard people would lose interest. Who wants to read all these names of people who've done these great things? They're interested in other things. We'll see, I don't know. Joan,
My first question, is there gonna be an ebook version? And
is what?
an ebook, like a narrated, audible book of the book? And do you think Columbia University Press will put it out as an ebook? I mean, not an ebook, audio book, right. And then the second question is really a bigger question. I mean, given everything you've seen so far and all the people you have worked with and your contacts in China, what do you think will happen when Xi Jinping ends? Do you think there will be a continuation of many of the many changes that he's put in place since 2012, or do you think we're going to revert back to, or we're going to see something more along the lines of a Taiwan-like change? I really want to hear your thoughts on what you think is going to happen in China, or could, or might happen in China.
You know me too well, Joan, to think I have a crystal ball. I remember seeing you in 1979, and we were introduced by our dearest mutual friends, of course. And so I have no illusions that you think I have some special ability to see what's going on. But I advise everybody in China to see the movie called The Death of Stalin. Because that's what Xi Jinping is setting up. And that movie is supposed to be a comedy. But I think the joke is on the people. And it was a terrific movie, and we're likely to see that kind of rivalry, and it's probably going on now with different relationships that aren't apparent, at least to me. So,
Can I just follow up and ask a question about, because I was recently, listening to Kevin Rudd talk about his book I was recently listening to, Kevin Rudd and talking about his book and the real return to kind of ideology and, pulling China back towards its more socialist roots, actually, its Marxist roots. And, I wonder from your point of view whether you think that shift back is a significant shift that people are buying into, on the China side. Not all the repression and, restrictions on freedom of speech and the lawyers, but the kind of inequality agenda, I would say, the sort of socialism agenda. So
there must be huge support, although not overt today, for a more socialist regime in China. These guys who are so successful at what they're doing couldn't care that much about socialism. So that's one of the big pressures. Of course, the other big pressure is political liberalism from the West. And that will be emblematic of an important push. But you've got others, including the military and the whole bureaucracy. So it's going to be chaotic. And I think one of the reasons I don't think Xi Jinping is going to invade Taiwan is he knows the real situation at home. And he knows he can't afford to make a mistake because he'll be out of there. That's why he's so afraid of assassination. You can't blame him for that. So China is in a very delicate situation today. They're not in the position to take many risks. The risks with the economy are sufficient. So I just feel that we gotta keep the current peaceful situation going, try to reduce the provocations against Taiwan, and try to have as much contact with them as possible, and in every way possible. But who can vouch for the future? Who knew what would happen to Hu Yaobang in the mid-80s? And who knew what would happen to Zhao Ziyang? So they represented important forces, but there were others more important.
Got it, thank
Let
you.
me-
What about the Audible book?
Let me know how it comes out.
I will tell you on the other side.
The thing that I find that must be so difficult is that people who spend all their lives on these things have to pass from this world, not knowing how things are coming out. And is there any way they could be informed?
Everybody in this room will tell you what happened when we're on the other side.
You know, when Fairbank and Reischauer each published memoirs of some interest, they gave me copies. And I was busy reading Xi Jinping on the rule of law. I never finished the books, but I had enough interaction with each of them to know about some of the stuff. And once they gave us the books, the curtains in our bedroom were always moving around too much because of the air conditioner. And so I used one of the volumes to keep them on one side and one on the other. And that enabled me with perfect plausibility. When they asked, how did you like it? I said, very useful. I must never tell them that.
Hi,
So
Jerry.
young.
All of us here are great fans of you, obviously, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And we have watched you over the many, many years with your great achievements. And then you have played a very important part in my life at certain critical points and stages of my life. And so we'll all read your book and also use it as a doorstop, probably. I'm trying to figure out whether or not there are things not in your book and not ones that we have heard from you. What I have in mind, because I'm reflecting on mine, is the road not taken or any regrets you have in your life, because you have had a mercurial climb in getting to the pinnacle of your profession, but there may be for you some, for example, I always thought you should have been Secretary of State, but that didn't happen. So were there other certain regrets in certain decisions or certain roads not taken?
As always, you ask a good question. I still see in my eye you and your brother Alan sitting together as freshmen at Harvard College, coming to the anti-Vietnam War protest that was going on. And I course, been disappointed in many things that happened, but I've been happy with other things that have happened. So in life, I've been very lucky, essentially, and I'm still here to talk about it, which is more than forthcoming and rush hour. So it's very, very difficult to foresee the future. But I feel especially guilty that I talked you into going to law school. Because you were gonna be a great physicist. And I talked you out of studying physics. And maybe you would have found a solution to some of our problems.
I would have taken us to Mars by now.
But at least we had some fun along the way.
Good tennis.
So, the last question will go to Ken.
Jerry, what about NYU law and Harvard law at the time caused you to make your change of affiliation?
Why I moved from, well, you see, I was already practicing law in New York. Harvard didn't permit you to become a partner in a law firm and be a full-time faculty member. And yet it was very convenient to have the freedom of a partner. And NYU offered that. That was a good reason. I think I could have gone to Columbia, but Randy Edwards was already there. And I thought it might have made him uncomfortable to have his ex-boss show up. Whereas NYU was a blank space, a good one. And John Sexton was eager to build up something. So it just made sense, and it was easily done.
Very serendipitous.
What?
Very serendipitous, your move.
Sure. Life is serendipitous.
So now what I'd like to do is introduce Professor Frank Upham, who was Jerry's student at Harvard and subsequently was with Jerry co-founder of the U.S. Asia Law Institute and co-director.
Yeah.
So I've been told. And over to you.
I'll be brief. Dangerous words from an American author. I want to start by noting an absence. If you win, you get a chance, as I have, to read the book. You will realize that throughout Jerry's life, Joan has been an all-encompassing presence. She was an all-encompassing presence for me and my wife as well, as of course was Jerry. So just that for Joan.
Good point. And I was delighted when Harvard established the chair.
Yes.
They did it in Joan's name as well as mine, because she played a very important role in encouraging our whole group, lifting our educational level by taking us to the Boston Museum and into our living room to learn about art and culture and politics in China. So you're quite right.
The other thing I just wanted to share is the deep joy that I have, and I think that all of us have, to have this occasion to be with Jerry once again. I hope that there's something about his openness to other people, his warmth, his bringing together all of us, that is very rare, and it's an accomplishment that I wish we could all aspire to. But now to my assignment. I was going to talk about Jerry as a risk taker. But I've sort of lost some of my enthusiasm since I realized I knew about Jack Downey, but I didn't know that Jerry had a chance to go. And Jerry turned it down. So I'm a little bit disappointed, but still, he is a risk taker. And when you read the book, one of the, to me, most striking parts of it was when Professor Prosser, for those of you who are lawyers and have taken torts, tried to get Jerry. Jerry was set up for a fabulous career teaching torts, and if he couldn't do that or didn't want to do that, Prosser offered him constitutional law, and Jerry said, no, too boring. And of course, he was right. And the other thing about, and he's also a risk, he likes risk, not only for himself, but I remember, and so does my wife, when I was posed to go into China, sitting in Hong Kong with Jerry on, I don't know, May 28th or something like that of 1989. And the U.S. government said, no American citizens should go into China. And so I was there and I asked Jerry, well, should I go? And Jerry said, well, it depends on whether you want to be a witness to history. My wife forgave him when I got back. Jerry is also a creator, and he created us. He created the field. And of course, there are other people involved, but when you read the book, you will see that so many of them were brought together, influenced, inspired by Jerry, and many of us, of course, fit that description. I certainly do. But he also created institutions. And he created the institution at Harvard that the one thing I knew I would not do when I was in college was become a lawyer. And when I heard about Jerry Cohen, and I applied to one law school. And that was, of course, because of Jerry and because of U.S Asian Legal Studies, and it changed my life. And then it changed my life again with the U.S. Asia Law Institute that he created here, and which will continue on because of the stewardship of Jose and Catherine and Bruce Ahrens and others to give institutional depth to the study of Asia, which in this particular time needs it greatly. And we in the United States, probably elsewhere too. And those are things that Jerry created. So I wanted to thank him from all of us And from Leslie too, Jerry.
Very nice, Frank.
To close us off, Professor Jose Alvarez is the faculty director of the U.S. Asia Law Institute and the Herbert and Rose Rubin Professor of International Law.
I will be brief because I know I'm standing in the way of drinks and the remaining food. So if there were any justice, a number of you present would be closing this event instead of me. I have the unmerited privilege of serving as faculty director of USALI. And as you know, USALI's mission is to continue the intra-U.S. Asia dialogues that Jerry has started with the guidance of course, Catherine and a few others like Frank Upham and Bruce Aronson, all three of whom know far more about Asia than I do. Now, this has been a celebration of an incredible person, an able diplomat, legal practitioner of great renown, passionate advocate, great scholar, and of course, teacher. And the indelible merits of Jerry, the person, are evident if, as I have been lucky enough to read the book. And they're evident, of course, to all of you who've had any contact with him all your lives. And some of the folks, at least mentioned in the book, who owe their very lives to Jerry. We are lucky that some 66 years after Jerry made incredibly his first attempt to start his memoirs, and his infant son put a stop to it by vomiting over the memoirs and the Smith Corona typewriter. I am so glad that no current of the many great-grandchildren did the same to prevent this current effort. The memoirs display the qualities of a man that we all have come to know, the generosity of spirit that, yes, name checks many in this room, simply because you were lucky enough to be in his path, the humility that prompts him to recall at one point in the book his father's complaint that, quote, ambition should be made of sterner stuff than you. A little ironic for someone who, in his 20s, had already been editor of the Harvard Law Review, clerked on the Supreme Court, and was on his way to a sterling academic career, second to none, and of course, would have excelled, as I think one comment just reflected, the many alternative career paths he mentions in the book that he did not choose to pursue, including, yes, Supreme Court Justice, Law School Dean, or yes, Secretary of State. And there is Jerry's wisdom, the even-tempered capacity to put in historical context the complexities and deep flaws of both the United States and China today. His memoirs are a valuable corrective to the tendency of some of us to forget the tremendous progress China has made if you judge by the horrors of the Cultural Revolution and not by the unrealistic expectations of those who anticipated a rights-respecting democracy in the West's image. And without glossing over the totalitarian government that rules China today, Jerry's final passages in his book remind us of how short the U.S. itself has fallen from the days when it considered itself the shining city on the hill. Now, much more can be said of the personal qualities of the person we're celebrating today, but in my very brief remaining time, I want to emphasize his vision and how it relates to USALI's efforts going forward. To the extent USALI has a normative mission, it continues to adhere to the broad policy recommendations that close his memoirs. It continues to serve as a forum for frank criticism of what Jerry calls, quote, another extreme in the pendulum swing towards repression, close quote, under Xi Jinping, including grave human rights violations directed at Chinese minorities, and a strikingly effective turn to repressing criticism of the Communist Party by redefining rule of law to mean to by law, and using advanced technological surveillance to make sure that it happens. USALI continues to engage in hopefully nuanced criticisms of China's engagement with law. That, to be sure, also includes discussion of improvements in its judicial system, at least for less political cases. And to be sure, USALI face-to-face rule of law programs in China, requested by and directed at Chinese judges and prosecutors. Jerry mentions them. To be sure, those no longer exist. And as the very recent Trump administration attempt to ban foreign aid funding suggests, such programs are increasingly unlikely. But more broadly, we still have an old-fashioned respect for the role of expertise and rational deliberation in the formulation of public policy, which is evident in Jerry's influential articles in the 1970s in Foreign Affairs. At least for now, we still think here, even in the age of Trump, that fostering dialogues among leading experts in comparative and international law in both countries can and should matter, as it did for Jerry and as it did for Nixon and Kissinger. As an academic institution, we really have no choice but to trust in academic expertise, despite the populist backlash against it. That reliance on rational argument and expertise means that we continue to believe, as Jerry does, that the underlying conditions that drove the U.S. to establish diplomatic relations with China still apply, and that it would harm both countries and the world to go down the path of a full decoupling, as if that were possible. USALI aspires to continue to, for its part, to foster U.S.-China dialogue and cooperation to resolve the many global commerce challenges that Jerry mentions in his book, Climate Change, Public Health, Food Security, Regulation of Cyber, Telecommunications, the Arctic, Outer Space, Arms Control. And at the same time, we need to recognize that we can no longer assume that the U.S. and China share common views on the value or content of international law, and perhaps of law itself. In the heady days of the 1980s and 90s, we could assume, like Jerry, that China was engaged in coming up to speed on learning, applying, and incorporating the domestically important aspect of Western law, particularly when it comes to economics. At that time, China was turning to Western laws governing credit, contracts, business transactions, and its global components, regimes governing international trade and investment. Today, China has largely mastered the art of international law, including the lesson that its rules can be remade by hegemonic powers, such as itself, and by deploying a de facto financial veto over financial institutions, as well as international ones, like the World Health Organization or UNESCO. China is no longer shy about exploiting trade and investment rules originally designed for market actors and turning them to the benefit of state-run enterprises that, at least in some cases, may promote governmental and not purely commercial goals. It is no longer shy about redeploying its Security Council veto or using the threat of it to get its way. China is now empowered to walk away from international adjudication to settle, say, law of the sea disputes, imitating the U.S. disdain for the International Court of Justice after the Nicaragua case. Perhaps inspired by recent Chinese efforts to redefine the rule of law domestically, China is now trying, with some success, to redefine fundamental legal concepts, such as what constitutes illegal intervention in domestic affairs for purposes of the UN Charter, what is sacrosanct and self-judging security issues that permit Hans Kelsen's law of the exception, and how to redefine sovereignty-restrictive rules contained in the Law of the Sea Convention. China's approach to, quote, constructive engagement, close quote, attempts to redefine what global human rights regimes are entitled to criticize and how they do so. And it is winning some adherents to its point of view around the world among governments who find old-fashioned human rights a little confining. Indeed, China is attempting to redefine even what a democracy is, as well as whether the UN has any business certifying the fairness of an election. All this means that while USALI is continuing to address the increasingly dire threats to Taiwan, that closes his book and rightly stressed in these memoirs, our programs must also address the evolving views of nations with respect to the applicable rules of international law. We will continue to address the need for the U.S. to re-examine security arrangements with countries like Japan and South Korea in the face of Chinese threats to Taiwan, and we will continue to address the traditional rules governing the law of the sea. For we can no longer assume that there is uniform agreement among international lawyers everywhere about what those rules are. We can no longer assume that all lawyers everywhere will agree that China has no legitimate territorial claim to Taiwan, that the wishes of that island's people must be consulted prior to or after an occupation, or that the United States can respond with military force to a plea by the authorities there for collective self-defense. These contentions may be up for grabs, depending on what happens elsewhere, particularly but not only in Ukraine in the immediate future. At a minimum, there will be a number of states taking the position that no such defensive action by the United States, even in response to a plea from Taiwan, would be legal absent Security Council authorization. Now, all of this suggests, on this and as many other cutting-edge issues, such as the governance of AI, the USALI programs will need to address competing efforts to negotiate new international law rules, as well as new interpretation of old ones, of treaty or custom. Fostering useful dialogue among the US and China, as well as other nations, cannot afford to ignore the elephant in the room that is implicit throughout these memoirs. Law, including international law, often evolves in deference to power. Now, that is surely a more important life lesson than one that Jerry cites, ironically, in the book. Namely, this is the life lesson he draws from someone else. Quote, always keep the shower curtain inside the bathtub. On behalf of all of us here, Jerry, and many who could not come and have sent their best wishes, thank you for your incredible inspiration and your counsel throughout all these years. Thank you.